extraordinary panelists. Let me just give you some comments, thoughts. One is that, well, we have been speaking about how can national statistical offices safeguard the confidentiality. How can we keep this promise that we give to our informants, which is a promise that is fundamental for the mere existence of the national statistical offices. Perhaps one of the worst nightmares of NSO is to lose the trust of the informants because of some kind of leak or the disclosure of confidential information. If one morning we wake up and see the front page of the newspapers and start looking at a list of numbers coming out from an NSO, that's the end of the office. And that's also the end of the officers of that office. So this problem of managing the risk of disclosure is especially important at this very moment because things have been changing very rapidly. And 20 years ago, we were in a safer world. Now, with this explosion of information that we have been talking about since yesterday, people wanting to break into our systems and get knowledge about our confidential information have more elements that they can use to do this. More elements in terms of other sources of information, and more elements in terms of the tools they can use to do this. So we are in something like an arms race. And we have to be able to defend this significant red line that every national statistical office has drawn. So we have, when some people go to the beach, there is a kind of a tension between how much you can show and how safe you are. So in this case, it's pretty much the same. And I think each and every one of you have spoken about not how to eliminate risk, but how to manage risk. Risk is there. And as it was mentioned, if you do want risk, you have to try to go working somewhere else. But I mean, the smart thing, there is a smart way of managing risk, and I think these presentations have each and every one shown strategies to a smart managing of risk. And by the way, this is similar to the protection of personal information that we were talking about yesterday. There is, I mean, the risk is there, but we just cannot forbid the generation of information because there are risks involved. Because information is very valuable, and we want to be able to supply the most information we can, while avoiding living that nightmare I was talking about. So about the presentation of Sarah, she put forward this different ways in which we can approach the problem. One is information reduction, and the other one is perturbation. I personally don't like information reduction because I will like to be able to show the most, to give the most elements of information to the public while keeping my job. And so she showed us that when you use, for example, cell suppression, you may face some problems, because then every next suppression you want to implement is conditioned by the tables you have already published. And you may end up under a situation in which you just can't, you get stuck. You cannot do what you want to do because the information is already published. So you may end up in a situation in which you don't have really degrees of freedom. And she also mentioned in the side of the perturbations, the input perturbation and output perturbations, these strategies of rounding and random noise implementation, and a number of different statistical considerations which have to do with the consequence of the at the level of the cell values. And the problem with this way of approaching the problem is that we end up changing the data. And we will, once again, we don't want to change data very much, just what is the minimum necessary. And and she showed this evaluation of the different alternatives. And if I got your point correctly, you kind of prefer input perturbation over the other. You do not. Okay, so it's a question. So my question is precisely this. So is there a best alternative for? In general, can we say that there is a best way of approaching this problem, or should we go case by case? But let me go on. Because I just want to mention about the presentation of Michelle, and so she gave us a flavor of the modernization of StatCan, which is one of the most advanced national statistical offices, which is in the way of modernizing again. I think this is a very important message for the rest of NSOs, especially for INEGI. So in this, she also mentioned this idea of managing the risk of disclosure. In fact, she presented this table in which we can see in the one hand the level of risk, and on the other hand the sensitivity. And I think one very important message is that you don't have to worry as much for every bit of information, because you have to be able to differentiate between or among different levels of sensitivity of information, and pay more attention on the risk related to the information with a high sensitivity. And this gives you a map that helps you to prioritize your level of attention and the protection you give to your statistical information. And Aref, besides some very good jokes, he mentioned again this idea of balancing confidentiality and risk, and he also, he presented this idea that we cannot avoid some risk, that we have to manage the risk. We can be on the side of being safe, or totally on the side of being safe, or totally on the side of being relevant and useful. But some way in the middle, you can choose your parameter. And the ones that have to choose that parameter are the highest authority, statistical authorities, right? And Peter Paul de Wolf mentioned this, the importance of cooperation, the idea of having common solutions to common problems, which I will translate to something like avoiding micro efforts, macro disorganized. This European Center of Excellence on Statistical Disclosure Control is a good example of how can we cooperate. But I see the risk of when you have a common solution to a common problem, then the individuals trying to get into your information and take out the confidential information may just have to do it once and then break into the systems of all the different countries. I don't know if this idea is correct or not, if you see this risk as a real problem. And so he also mentioned this idea of an agreement that is just for some time, in this case 4 years, with specific objectives and goals. It sounds like a very good idea, not to have a group for forever, but to have clear objectives and then based on the advances, deciding if the group should continue or not. And so these are my general comments. I think I learned a lot. I hope everybody else learned also a lot. And I would like to open the floor for comments. But before that, I will like them to comment on my questions. And the general question is, if you agree that we just can't avoid the risk of losing some confidential information, and about what are the best ways to managing this kind of risks that form part of the life of the national statistical officers in the world.
Can I start?
Please, okay. From right to left. It's okay?
Okay. Well, is this on? Hello? Okay, good. First and foremost, I know this is obvious to many of you, but when you go back to your various places, it's important to explain to people that an IT breach is very different from a statistical data breach. An IT breach is illegal when people go through back doors in order to get to protected data. That is illegal, and many of the IT professionals in your own places do not see the distinction. Statistical data breach has two types. One where we, whether intentionally or unintentionally, have unauthorized breaches. Now that is illegal for all of us, including at the Census Bureau. The problem is when people on the outside are clever enough to be able to bring all of this big data in, to do record linkage, to find out information we don't want them to have. That's completely legal, and that's what all of us together are trying to prevent. So just make sure you take one takeaway that you can take back to your offices is IT security is very different from privacy. Okay. And then I have to commend my fellow speakers because we are all, since I like to sing, we're all singing from the same songbook. While we are at the Census Bureau trying to implement new research methods, the work of data perturbation, data reduction, all of that work continues. And so the work that's being done by our sister agencies is critically important to the work we do. From Michelle's talk, that she was talking about the good, safe spaces. I sit on the Disclosure Review Board at the Census Bureau, where week after week, sometimes twice a week, people are bringing statistical data products they want to release. Whether it's from our federal statistical research data centers, which Michelle talked about, or even from within the Census Bureau. We make sure that our data are safe, so that we have, it goes back to the 5 safes. We make sure that's happened. So the work that's happening to make things safe, will continue into the future. That is not going away. And what I liked best about Peter Paul's presentation is that all of our work on differential and formal privacy is being documented in GitHubs as well. So to me, the way for us to succeed, and to answer your question for our moderator, is that the best way for us to succeed is by working together.
Thank you very much.
Well, of course, I cannot disagree by saying that cooperation is the best way to proceed. So I agree completely. Coming back also a bit to your general question about risk avoidance, or the fact that you cannot avoid risk completely and how to deal with it. Well, I think partly also in our legislation it's said that we should take enough measures to prevent disclosure. Well, enough measures, of course, is very subjective, and but I think it's very important for an NSI to be very transparent in the way that you are applying or you're trying to avoid the disclosure risk. So we are telling the people there are pages on our website stating the ways we deal with it on the statistical confidentiality side and on the IT side, because like I have said, there's also an IT breach is possible. We always have a external audit, an auditing bureau that's going to audit our systems once in whatever, 2 years, I don't know. So that's, and you have to be very transparent and have to give the results of those audits and the results of what you're doing, tell that to your users so that they know exactly at least the efforts that you put into it. And for the risk management, I think it's also very important, also a little bit like Felix said, it's user dependent. For each user, you have a different risk you have to control. If you trust your user, if it's a researcher, you have a different risk analysis and a different risk management compared to the general public that's going to use the figures that you publish on your website for the whole world. So you have different risk management there. And the most important thing, I can't stress that enough, is the transparency. You also have to show the methods, and that's relating also a little bit about your question about presenting some harmonized methods. Maybe intruders can use that information. Well, it's very important to be transparent about the methods that you're using, but each method has its own parameters, and the parameters that you're using usually you do not make public.
Okay.
It's a little bit like encryption. You say what kind of, you use AES or whatever kind of encryption method, but you don't tell them the key. It's something like that. So that's the... Yeah, and finally, you said something about continuation of the framework partnership. If the stable group is, it's also good to have, to evaluate the group once in a while. And I think that's also the basic idea. If we have a new FPA, if Eurostat is willing to invest in it, there will be a new construction. We have to make a new proposal for a new consortium, and very likely the majority of the current partners will be in it, but maybe there will be some more, or there will be some others. So there is some kind of evaluation of the group of that will be working together.
Thank you, Peter Paul. Thank you very much. Michelle?
It's difficult to add more on what my two other colleagues have said, because it is almost the same message as what Peter Paul is saying. It's all about transparency, accountability, and in our organization, we use the term due diligence. You have to show you have done your homework. And once you show you have done your homework and the best you can do, things happen.
Yeah.
I mean, accident happen, unintentional thing could happen. But if you have shown that you have the governance, the approbation process, all the method, the IT security, all the safeguards, and you show that to your users, it's due diligence. And we repeat that to our employee. Show you have done your homework, and Canadian will follow you. We have this trust of, you talk about in the beginning, the trust of the user is key, because you won't have any respondents.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as, I'm not in the business of confidentiality. I'm in the business of statistical information. If I don't have data, I cannot do anything. So I have to protect that information, and I have to show that I have done my homework. And we're very transparent on our website, and so much information I can't even find anything. But we have our linkage agreements are there. All the data file that we're using, we're accessing. All the legal stuff is accessible to every Canadian to look. Look, we have this file on you. We have this and that. We have a probation and authority, and but it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Lots of work, but you have to do.
Thank you, Michelle. Sarah?
Yes. Yes, I still have to put that right about input perturbation. I didn't say so much about input perturbation, and if you got me wrong that I'm in favor for input perturbation, then, well, the good point is that I was fair, obviously, with the method, because that's the method that or the type of method that I didn't favor. Actually, this list of evaluation criteria, the history in Germany is that we had to take a decision which type of method we are going to use for the next census. In the last census, we've used an input perturbation method. I didn't say much on that because it's a method that has been developed in Germany, and it's a very complex method. You need extra computers because it handles very difficult computational problems. It takes 2 months almost to run all the German data through this tool. But afterwards, you have tables where there are no ones and twos in the tables anymore. And you can state a huge number of desired output tables that are protected in such a way that it's more or less optimal. But even considering this, the noise applied by this method is much higher than with output perturbation. It's more or less at the level of rounding to rounding base 10. And we had very long discussions if we should go for this method again or if we change the method. In the end, it was a very tight decision, but and that was why I was explaining so much about the output perturbation method, because that's the method we are going to use in the next census. But in this team, when we were writing this catalog of evaluation criteria, then all the stakeholders in confidentiality in Germany have been involved, also the people who favored the input perturbation method. And there are good arguments for input perturbation as well. We are going now for output perturbation, and we will see what happens.
So just when you mention all the stakeholders, who are you talking about? You.
Sorry. Who are the stakeholders? Well, in Germany, we are the federal office. We are more or less organized similar to yours, that with the member states. We have the National Statistical Institute and we have the state statistical institutes. There are 16 states in Germany, and well, they are quite independent. So we try to take joint decisions, and they are majority decisions. So you have to convince people. So, for example, the census decision, I think it was 9 for this method, and the other ones for the other method. And it's like with this cooperation on the European level. We also in Germany we have the same cooperation. There are some of the institutes who have expertise in confidentiality, and they work together.
Thank you very much. It's time to open the floor for questions from the public. So please have a question here.
Thank you very much for your talks. It was very interesting. I have only one question to Michel. It's about no, it's not. It's a naive question, I think. It's about the concept, because you speak about sensitive and insensitive data. We had also the discussion yesterday about those two words, because in data protection, both sensitive and insensitive are personal data. And then we call sensitive data all data related to health, sexual life, political beliefs, and so on. And non-sensitive, it's the West. And we have a level of protection which are different from sensitive and non-sensitive data, like I showed the graph yesterday. What do you call non-sensitive data? Which means for you non-personal data? Or that's the difference between both. It's no personal data and personal data, or not? Because it can be, introduce confusion between data protection and the statistical world, if I can talk like that.
Yeah, I think it comes from the previous period where we only have sensitive and non-sensitive, and basically the non-sensitive was the fact if you were not identified as sensitive, so it was a complement of the other. I don't think we had a definition of what is non-sensitive, but if you were not identified, I don't know if I'm making myself clear. So if you're not sensitive, by default, you had to be non-sensitive. So I think we use the same approach. So you start off by defining what is sensitive, highly sensitive, less sensitive, and whatever residual part, that's a non-sensitive part. I don't think we have a definition, but for sure you have no direct identifier, no indirect attribute. So minimal risk, no harm, no personal information, no business information. So it's all this, that the residual part is you have almost no data point that you can actually combine to identify an individual or a business. So.
Only one reflection to RF about IT breach and data breach. I think the IT breach can lead to a data breach. Absolutely. Do I understand well? They are different, yes, but they are connected.
Oh, absolutely, they're connected.
The data breach is not necessarily, but it can.
Right, okay. Sure. And again, the critical thing is what is legal and what is illegal. Record linkage is completely legal. But someone breaking into our systems, that's why we protect them so carefully. And that's why all of us take pledges or oaths that we do not release, we don't do unauthorized disclosure of data. So yes, that's also illegal.
Because in GDPR, we have a notion of data breach very wide. Even if there's a question of non-availability of data, it's a data breach. Then it's very, very wide, and maybe wider than in US. We include all defect of data in the data breach, which is illegal by definition.
Right, and as I mentioned before, one challenge that we have in the United States is that we have many different federal statistical agencies, and some, how should I say this, are more careful about their privacy than others. And when we link between our data sets, then we have to be very careful with what is linked to ours, because we have to manage our own integrity even if we link to others, and we have to make sure that people are careful in when they link to ours.
Thank you very much. There is some other question, please.
Just two factual questions. Peter Paul, the FPAs, is that limited to European NSIs, or are there possibilities to bring in extra-European groups as well? And then for Sarah, on your catalogue of things, that strikes me as a really useful piece of for our field. Is it available, and is it available in German only?
Okay, well, I think my answer is quite easy. It's as far as I know, the FPA is only for European institutes.
There is no possibility of subcontracting.
Subcontracting can be outside, but as I said, it's not very favorable financially.
Well, the catalog is maybe available on request. For example, we've just given it to the German Federal Employment Agency, to the statistics branch. I'm afraid it is in German only. But if you like to have it, then... Well, at the moment, I have to agree with all the co-authors, but, well, in principle, yes.
Thank you. Any other? Oh, yeah, you still have.
Yeah. Yes, I forgot with your question about the stakeholders. What we also think is very important that in a decision about a disclosure control method, especially for a perturbative disclosure control method, it's very important to take the users of the data with you in that decision. And we did that in our census decision. There was always a representative of the municipalities, because we think the census data are most important for the municipalities. And the second statistic, which took a decision, that was an educational statistic, high school education. No, not high school, university. And actually this picture with a panel when explaining the additive noise method, that was goes back to one of the professors. Well, in educational statistics, high school or university statistics, you have professors in the board. So we explained the methods, and he thought about the method, and then he said, well, it's nice, but we could put it this way. And well, that was how we got those users on board, and they agree that we use this method even if it's not additive. And that's important, to have the users with you.
And I'd like to add something about stakeholders. Stakeholders can often disagree with each other in what they want. And I'll give two examples from just sample surveys, and then two examples from privacy. In sample surveys, I still work on something called the American Housing Survey, which follows not the people, but the housing units themselves over a very long period of time. When a house was built, when a house was remodeled, we don't follow the people, we follow the household. For some people, for example, the real estate places that sell houses, that they're fine if we follow we follow a housing unit for 2 years or 10 years, what's the change in price? But not so the economists. The economists want to have 1,000 variables in their model, and so they want to have a time series that goes back for 300 years, even if our data don't go back for 300 years. That's on the survey side. On the privacy side, we are very happy when people want to have counts that are at the state level, the province level, at the national level. Even when we do extensive privacy methods, we feel secure about our counts at high levels of geography. I'm going to blame them again. It's those beloved economists that want to have all of these parameters, and they want to have all kinds of time series models. And to have the appropriate level of protection, it will hurt the accuracy of their models. And again, it's trying to reflect the different kinds of stakeholders we have. That is a challenge for all of us.
It's the economists all the time. Natalia.
One is for Sarah. When talking about the stakeholder, and you decide among the 16 institutions of Germany to go for one method, they all stick to the standard. That's one. And the other one is for Michelle. What is the difference between virtual IT enclave and research data centers?
Yes. Yes, that's the difference between Europe and Germany. Once we've taken this a majority decision, they all adhere to it.
Michelle?
The difference basically is through the IT infrastructure. So the virtual enclave would go through the cloud, but still be in a physical location in one of our other department. So the data would not be on StatCan server, but on a cloud. But the physical protection, the setting would be similar. but you can have more mobility, let's say, because once you set up a room in a department, then you can link into the cloud. You don't have to actually build a place in university, and that's the only RDC you have. So that's the flexibility of it.
You provide access to the same data in both types?
No. It's always it's always user-centric. It's always derived by the user. If user needs data ABC, you only have access to data ABC, whether it's in the RDC, in the virtual data, whatever cloud. The user only have access to whatever data they're supposed to have access to. So. Oh. Yeah, keep the mic.
Now, I was thinking more in terms of you have data from household service and you have data from economic service. Both types of data are available in both types of services.
No. The research data center right now have a limited number of household census file. In theory, on the cloud, you can have more file as you decide which level the file can be in. So in the virtual data enclave, the definition which file goes with the classification of the file. So if we decide that in the virtual enclave you're type 4, or no, probably higher, type 7, only data file that have the type 7 could go there in theory. But in research data center is more predefined. It's microdata, highly sensitive, type classification 9 only.
Another way to agree with the same answer is that when someone accesses public use data and they download it off the internet, it's gone. That means that they can do any analysis they want on the data, and we make sure it's well protected. There is a certain level of protection if you want to go to a federal statistical research data center. You can access more private data. I hope I'm speaking correctly. You can access more private data at a research data center because they have safeguards, and I know there are special. I'm very enamored by the research data centers they have in Germany. I mean, they are very locked. You have to have special permissions to get in, and there is an administrator to make sure that you're not taking anything out that you can. So you have access to a higher quality of data, and in the United States, and I probably speak for everyone, there's always a greater and greater command. We want one at our campus. We want one at our data facility, but there is actual financial cost to having those data centers. We would always be happier to have a relationship with the universities and then have people come visit us at our headquarters, and then we can really see what they are doing. So with more access to the data, we don't just provide it online. They have to show the need for the data, and then it's got safe spaces, safe places. We give them that place where they can access the data they need.
Okay, so does it mean that the future of the RDCs in the U.S. universities is, will not continue growing?
It's continuing to grow because people want to have, especially in the era where people want to see exactly what the data show, and they want to see, how should I say this, data that are less protected.
Okay.
That's one place that they can go without coming to headquarters.
Okay, Michelle.
Just to make a precision, in the RDC, it's almost the similar file as we have access, because in the RDCs it's deemed employee, so we deem the users to be like Stat 10 employees, so they are under oath. And there's a limited number of RDC because it's very costly, because it's in the university, in 21 Canadian university, and they have to build it and put the server in and all the other setting. As the idea of the virtual enclave, you can actually have it anywhere you want. Once you decide, okay, this is, let's say, level 6, in this department, you have just set up a room, and the other safeguard would be through the IT access, through the cloud. So it is a bit more flexible for the virtual enclave. And for us, in our cost model, it was less expensive to develop the virtual data enclave.
But there is a trade-off, isn't it? In terms of the detail of what, and the level of confidentiality of information you can look at in both environments.
Yes.
Okay, so is there any other question? If while you come out with your next questions, I would like to ask Aref if he can please explain us a little bit more about this idea of. He mentioned formally private releases, formally private methods, differentially private methods. What are you precisely speaking about? Talking about?
The way that. Thank you. I will try to keep it as brief as I can. The idea of differential privacy is that if an intruder knows everything, all the information about a data set except for one observation, they know everything but one, that you will have very little additional information from a publicly released data set so that you can identify that final one. That you limit the amount. You have enough noise. So if you're trying to get a tally, in some other presentations, they're called queries. That queries, the distributions, the queries will not change much with one additional observation. It can be one additional observation, one more, one fewer, or if you change, you modify, you edit a single observation. That is how differential privacy works.
So this implies that you have to, before you release anything, you have to implement the noise in the databases.
And there are many flavors of privacy. There's one called local differential privacy, where you do all of your noise infusion before, at the very, very beginning, before it even gets into the database. So even the database curator, the people managing the data, don't have access to the actual data. So there are certain levels of privacy that you can have even within those formally private methods.
Okay, and what kind of controls do you have to be sure that you are not adding noise to a level in which you are giving a false impression of what is happening in reality?
Right, and so the type of noise infusion, and again, I don't want to talk too technically, but there are many different distributions of noise one can add. The most common way is called the double exponential or the Laplace distribution, where that level of epsilon will determine how much noise. So when you determine that this is the level of trade-off you want, that this is the level of noise that you add. So if you want to have that greater protection, you add more noise. If you're willing to accept less protection for the sake of accuracy, then you add less noise.
Okay. But that kind of tuning is the same for the whole country, or you have to go state by state or county by county? How does it work?
Right. In fact, you can determine how you want to partition that level of trade-off. You can have more trade-off at a higher level, more trade-off at a lower level. It is, as they say, composable, where you can have them at different levels and decide where you want to have that trade-off. Do you want to have most of your privacy at the top, most of your privacy at the bottom? It does not have to be it doesn't have to be even. It can be how the senior policymakers decide. It's flexible.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for all our four panelists for their very good and interesting presentations. Let's give them a round of applause. And please receive these diplomas from. Okay.
Survived.
Okay. Yeah. You have A+. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much. Sarah. Michelle.